At Thanksgiving, my sister found out I was secretly wealthy. Then my entire family turned on me, demanding I hand over everything because she needed it more. Thanksgiving had always been a weirdly sacred tradition in our family. No matter how much we argued throughout the year, everyone somehow managed to show up to Mom and Dad's house on the last Thursday of November, bringing casseroles, pies, and unresolved tensions. This year was no different, at least not until dessert. We were packed around the long oak dining table, laughing at Uncle Jeff's usual off-color jokes and enduring Aunt Mel's third retelling of her turkey mishap of '98. I was sitting quietly, sipping wine, watching my younger sister Tara talk about her latest startup venture that had, according to her, so much potential once she got the right investor. I offered a polite smile, nodding at her enthusiasm while keeping my mouth shut. I'd always been the quiet sibling, the one who didn't stir the pot. But that night, something shifted. My cousin Max, half drunk and overly loud, blurted out, "Hey, aren't you loaded now? Like, didn't your crypto thing blow up or something?" The room went silent. Forks paused midair. I could feel every pair of eyes locking onto me like laser beams. I shrugged, trying to brush it off. I did all right. But Max wasn't done. "Come on, dude. Tell him. What was it? 10 mil? 12? I felt Tara freeze next to me. Her fingers tightened around her wineglass. I gave a non-committal laugh, something like that. The damage was done. Mom's face paled. Dad raised an eyebrow. And Tara? Her expression hardened instantly. "Wait, what? You have $12 million?" The disbelief in her voice cracked through the room. "And you've never said anything?" The questions began pouring in, overlapping like a messy pileup. "How? When? Why didn't you tell us? Are you still working?" I felt cornered like a trapped animal. "It was just smart investing, some luck," I said, hoping to keep it vague. But Tara wasn't interested in vague. Her face twisted in a way I hadn't seen before. Hurt mixed with entitlement. "You've been sitting on 12 million while I've been begging banks for funding?" Her voice rose. "That's insane." I looked around the table, suddenly realizing I wasn't among family anymore. I was among judges. The car ride home that night was silent. No music, no conversation, just the humming of tires against pavement and the weight of what had happened clinging to me like fog. My wife, Rachel, sat next to me, her hands clenched in her lap. She didn't speak until we turned onto our street. "You okay?" she asked softly. I nodded, but I wasn't. That moment, when the energy at the table shifted, kept replaying in my head. The shift from familial warmth to accusation was almost physical. It wasn't just Tara's expression that stuck with me. It was my mother's silence, the way she didn't defend me, and my father's nod as if silently agreeing with Tara, as if they had already decided I owed her something. By the next morning, my phone was flooded with messages, texts from my parents, a couple from Tara, even a long email from Aunt Mel suggesting I consider helping out the family. At first I was in disbelief. I scrolled through the messages with a sinking stomach. It felt like everyone had suddenly rewritten the family rules without me. I had worked my ass off, investing smartly when no one believed in crypto, enduring years of ridicule and doubt, even going into debt to keep some of my investments alive. And now that it had paid off, they acted like it had always been theirs too. Rachel, seeing my mood darken, tried to lift my spirits. "You don't owe them anything," she said firmly. "You earned it." I wanted to believe that, but part of me kept wondering, had I changed that much? Or had they just finally revealed how they saw me? The most surreal part came when Tara showed up at our front door unannounced. She was alone, wearing a carefully curated look of humility. She sat in our living room, sipping coffee like it was a business meeting. "I'm not asking for much," she began. "Just enough to get my startup off the ground. You know I've got a good idea. I just need capital." I stared at her, stunned. There was no congratulations, no curiosity about my journey, just expectation and entitlement. "Why do you think you deserve it?" I asked finally. Her answer was instant. "Because I need it more." I stared at her, unable to find words. My little sister, who used to chase butterflies in the backyard with me, was now sitting across from me like a stranger with a pitch. "I don't mean to sound ungrateful," she added quickly, "but come on, you don't need all that money. What are you even going to do with it?" That question cut deeper than I expected. It wasn't just about the money. It was about value, my value. Like my choices, my risks, my sacrifices meant nothing because they didn't fit her narrative of success. I took a deep breath, tried to keep my voice even. Tara, I didn't win the lottery. I made smart bets. I lived in a crappy studio for years, worked jobs I hated, and missed birthdays because I was coding. You were getting degrees and loans. I was bootstrapping every dollar I had. She crossed her arms, her tone sharpening. So, you're saying no. I'm saying it's not that simple. She stood up, her face stony. It is that simple. You have something I need. You're choosing not to help me. That was the moment I knew things would never be the same. She left without hugging me, without even saying goodbye. Over the next few days, the family drama went nuclear. My mom called to say she was heartbroken, that I was turning my back on blood. My dad was more passive-aggressive, texting things like, "Money can build bridges or burn them." Even cousins I barely spoke to suddenly had opinions. Facebook posts vaguely aimed at me, comments about selfishness disguised as family values. Rachel suggested we get away for a bit, maybe take a trip. I agreed, needing air, space, anything to escape the toxic storm brewing at home. But even as we checked into a quiet cabin upstate, the anxiety followed me. What haunted me most wasn't their anger. It was their certainty, their collective belief that because I had something, I owed it to them. That my success was a shared resource. It felt like I was no longer a son, a brother, a cousin. I was an ATM with a pulse, and nothing I said could change that. We stayed at the cabin longer than we originally planned. The silence of the woods and the lack of cell service offered the kind of peace I didn't realize I was desperate for. Rachel brought books. I brought a journal, and for the first time in weeks, I had time to think without a barrage of notifications pulling me back into chaos. I kept flipping through my thoughts, trying to pinpoint the moment my family had turned me into something other than a person. I remembered growing up with Tara, how we shared bunk beds, fought over cereal, how I used to help her sneak back in after curfew so Mom wouldn't ground her. We were close. In that way, siblings are close by default and necessity. I never resented her success, even when she went to grad school overseas while I worked nights. She was the golden child, the one with the bright smile and endless support. I was the weird one with tech stuff. I never expected applause, but I didn't expect this either. On our third night at the cabin, I finally opened up to Rachel. I told her everything, my fears, my doubts, the guilt that was quietly eating away at me. What if they're right? I asked. What if I'm just being selfish? Rachel looked at me like I'd lost my mind. You think not giving away millions of dollars makes you selfish? She said. You've donated to charities. You paid off your student loans without help. You didn't even buy a new car until your old one literally died on the highway. You haven't changed. They did. That landed hard, not because I hadn't thought it myself, but because hearing her say it made it real. I wasn't selfish. I was a scapegoat. A convenient target for all the resentment they'd been carrying for years. Tara's dreams had hit roadblocks, and instead of confronting her own choices, she projected that disappointment onto me. My parents couldn't reconcile the quiet kid turning into a millionaire without asking for their advice. The money wasn't the problem. It was the shift in narrative. I had flipped the script, and they didn't know how to read their new lines. That night, as Rachel fell asleep beside me, I made a quiet promise to myself. I wouldn't apologize for my success. Not anymore. I wouldn't shrink to make them comfortable. If that meant becoming the villain in their story, so be it. At least I'd know the truth. Returning home was like stepping back into a different reality. The house felt colder somehow. Not because of the temperature, but because of the unspoken tension that seemed to have followed us back like a fog. My phone lit up as soon as we crossed city limits. Missed calls, group messages, and even a voicemail from Mom that started off sweet but quickly turned into emotional blackmail. You know how much this family's done for you, she said, her voice cracking in a way that would have guilt-tripped me in a heartbeat 10 years ago. But now? Now it felt rehearsed, almost strategic, like she knew exactly which emotional buttons to push. What made it worse was the sudden intervention attempt, a family meeting planned at my parents' house under the guise of a normal Sunday dinner. I knew what it was before we even pulled up, but Rachel convinced me to go, just to hear them out. When we walked in, the air was thick with tension. Everyone was already seated, and it was obvious from the way they all looked at me that this wasn't going to be a dinner. It was an ambush. Tara sat next to Dad, her expression unreadable, but her posture rigid. Mom offered a forced smile, but I saw the edge behind her eyes. The food was on the table, untouched. That's when Dad spoke, his voice slow and deliberate. "Son, we've all been talking, and we think there's a way to make things right." I didn't respond. He continued. "Tara has a plan, and she just needs backing. You'd still have more than enough left over." Then Tara chimed in, listing projections, figures, a whole slideshow on her tablet like this was a boardroom pitch. When she finished, they all looked at me expectantly, like I was supposed to clap and pull out a checkbook. I leaned back, took a deep breath, and said quietly, "No." Silence. It was like I'd dropped a bomb in the middle of the table. "What do you mean, no?" Mom asked. "I mean, no. I'm not investing in something I don't believe in, especially out of guilt." Tara scoffed. "You're unbelievable." And there it was, the mask slipping, the entitlement fully exposed. I stood up. "I came here out of respect, but if this is how you see me now, just a wallet, then maybe it's better I leave." And with that I walked out, for the first time feeling like I was finally choosing myself. In the days following that dinner, I didn't hear a word from any of them, not my parents, not Tara, not even the cousins who had chimed in so freely before. It was as if I'd been excommunicated, silently erased from the family ledger. Part of me was relieved. The quiet was a balm. But another part, a deeper part rooted in years of familial identity, felt like it was grieving. Not for people who had died, but for relationships that had. It's strange, losing people who are still alive. You keep expecting the phone to ring or someone to show up just to clear the air, but it doesn't happen. Instead, you start walking through your own life differently, more cautiously, more consciously. I began to evaluate everything with new eyes. Rachel stood by me, always calm, always supportive, and for the first time in a long while I started thinking about what I wanted, what we wanted, without the noise of other people's expectations clouding it. I hired a financial advisor, updated my estate plans, even started quietly donating to causes I believed in. Anonymous scholarships for underserved kids in tech, funding local coding boot camps. Giving in a way that felt right, not performative, and the more I gave quietly, the more at peace I felt. Not every dollar had to be some grand gesture to please others or prove something. Around the same time, I started therapy, not because I felt broken, but because I needed help untangling the emotional knots that had been tightening for years. My therapist, a sharp and grounded woman named Elise, helped me understand that what happened wasn't really about the money. It was about identity, about roles we're assigned in families, and how violently people react when you step outside of yours. I had been the underachiever, the silent one, the guy who wouldn't speak up. And suddenly, I was the successful one who didn't ask permission. That shift broke the narrative, and people don't like broken narratives. Elise helped me realize I didn't need to fix things to feel whole again. I just needed to honor my own story, even if it didn't fit into theirs anymore. And slowly, I began to forgive, not them, not yet, but myself, for not seeing it sooner, for waiting so long to put up boundaries, for thinking that love had to come with conditions and guilt. I was finally unlearning all that. Months passed without a single word from my family, and what started as awkward silence eventually calcified into something more permanent. Holidays came and went, Christmas, New Year's, even Mom's birthday, and each one passed without invitation, without a text, without a trace. It was painful at first, the way grief usually is, but in a strange way. It also gave me clarity. With distance came perspective. I began to recognize how often I had minimized myself to keep peace at the dinner table, how often I'd let passive comments slide or bit my tongue when Tara belittled my work. I remembered being 19 and telling my dad about a blockchain project I was building, and him brushing it off with a laugh and, "Real jobs don't have coins in them." Or when I skipped a family trip because I couldn't afford it, and Tara said, "Maybe you should have gotten a real degree." All of it flooded back, but now, instead of shame, I felt grounded. I had built something. I had weathered storms they knew nothing about. and I had done it without demanding a thing from them. One evening, Rachel and I sat on the patio, watching the sky deepen from gold to indigo, and she asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Do you miss them?" I didn't answer right away. I thought about the noise, the drama, the manipulation. But I also thought about Tara falling asleep on my shoulder during long car rides as kids, about my mom dancing in the kitchen while the turkey roasted, about my dad's corny puns when we'd fix things in the garage. "Yeah," I said finally, "I miss who they used to be, or maybe who I thought they were." That night I wrote a letter. Not an apology, not a peace offering, but a statement. I didn't send it. I didn't even sign it. I just wrote it for myself. I poured out everything I wished they had seen. The nights I stayed up working, the failures I faced alone, the wins I wanted to share but didn't because I knew they'd be met with resentment. Writing it was cathartic. It was like pulling out a splinter buried deep in skin. Painful, but freeing. I realized I didn't need reconciliation to move forward. I just needed truth. And in telling it, even if only to myself, I began to heal in ways I didn't know I needed. Spring arrived like a gentle exhale, and with it came small shifts in my emotional weather. I no longer felt the sting when someone mentioned their family plans or scrolled past smiling Thanksgiving photos online. Instead, I found new rituals. Rachel and I started Sunday brunches at this small cafe tucked between a bookstore and a florist, a quiet place where nobody knew our story and nobody cared. We made friends with the barista, talked about books with the owner, and started building something soft and meaningful around ourselves. One Sunday, as I flipped through a local community newsletter at our usual table, I saw a call for mentors for a youth tech initiative downtown. Without hesitation, I signed up. Every Thursday afternoon, I spent time with a group of teens, most of them from underserved neighborhoods, teaching them coding basics, helping them build small apps, and most importantly, showing them that their ideas mattered. It was the most fulfilling work I'd done in years. One kid, Malik, reminded me so much of myself. It was eerie, quiet, observant, unsure if the world would ever take him seriously. I saw the way he lit up when a line of code finally worked, the way he sat taller when I told him his ideas were good. It hit me then that maybe the legacy I left behind didn't need to be some grand family reconciliation. Maybe it could be this, showing someone else the way forward when I had to stumble through it alone. One evening, Malik handed me a note he'd written on a torn piece of notebook paper. It said, "Thanks for seeing me." I kept it. I still have it. That line said more than my family ever did. Around that same time, Rachel and I started talking seriously about the future, marriage, a house, maybe even kids someday. It felt good to dream without the weight of obligation, to plan for something just because we wanted it, not because someone expected it. For the first time in a long time, life felt expansive again, not tied to old narratives or bound by guilt, just open. I realized I'd stopped checking my phone for missed calls. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for apologies, not for permission, not for closure. I had carved out peace where chaos once lived, and in that quiet space, I was finally starting to feel whole again. Then, one afternoon, nearly a year to the day since that Thanksgiving disaster, I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. The handwriting was familiar, tight, slanted, unmistakably Tara's. I held it in my hands for a long moment, debating whether to open it or toss it in the trash. Curiosity won. Inside was a short letter, handwritten and surprisingly raw. She didn't apologize, not exactly, but she did acknowledge how things had spiraled. "I was angry," she wrote, "angry at myself, at the choices I made, at how easy things looked for you, even though I knew they weren't. I just didn't want to feel like I'd lost." That line stuck with me. It was the closest she'd ever come to admitting the truth. She went on to say that Mom wasn't well, that she'd been having memory lapses, that Dad was overwhelmed, and that the family wasn't the same since I walked out. "I'm not writing to ask for money," she added. "Just wanted you to know what's going on." It was strange. After all the anger, all the silence, I didn't know what to feel. A part of me softened when I read those lines. Another part tensed up, remembering the manipulation, the entitlement, the expectation that I'd fix everything just because I could. Rachel read it with me. "What do you want to do?" she asked. I didn't know. That night, I went for a walk, my mind chasing itself in circles. I thought about visiting Mom, about whether I owed it to her, to Dad, to Tara. But I also thought about boundaries, about peace hard-earned, about how easily old patterns could reassert themselves if I wasn't careful. I didn't want to be pulled back into a dynamic that reduced me to a utility. I wanted any connection to come from a place of honesty, not guilt, not need, just mutual humanity. And yet something inside me stirred, a flicker of care that hadn't been extinguished completely. I didn't write back. Not yet. But I didn't tear the letter up either. I folded it carefully and placed it in my drawer, next to the note Malik gave me. 2 pieces of paper. 2 lives I had touched in very different ways, and both somehow still mattered. The difference was only one of them expected nothing in return, and that's what made all the difference. A year later, Thanksgiving came around again, and this time, Rachel and I hosted our own small gathering. Just a few close friends, people who'd become our chosen family, those who showed up without expectations or ulterior motives, who shared joy without scorekeeping. We cooked together, played cards, and passed around photos from the past year, Rachel's hiking trip, my tech mentorship program, the garden we'd planted out back. There was laughter, stories, warmth, and for the first time in a long time, I felt fully present. No weight in my chest, no quiet dread of obligation hovering around the holidays. That morning, I'd received another letter from Tara, this one shorter than the last. I don't know if you'll read this, it began, but I wanted to thank you for not giving in, for holding your ground. It forced me to really look at myself. She went on to say she was in therapy, trying to unpack not just what had happened between us, but what had been driving her for years. I don't expect anything, she wrote. Just wanted you to know I'm working on it. I still didn't respond, but I did feel something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, maybe not yet, but understanding that even the people who hurt us can grow if they're willing to face their own darkness. Later that evening, as the last of our friends left and Rachel curled up beside me with a glass of wine, I stepped out onto the porch alone. The air was crisp, the sky clear, stars scattered above like tiny possibilities. I thought about legacy, not the kind measured in money or family names, but the quieter kind. The impact we leave in people's lives when we choose courage over compliance, truth over convenience. I had spent so much of my life trying to prove I was worthy of respect, of love, of a seat at the table. But standing there, I realized I didn't need their table anymore. I'd built my own, smaller maybe, simpler, but honest, and everyone at it had earned their place. That night, I didn't think about what I'd lost. I thought about what I'd kept, my peace, my dignity, my voice. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth more than $12 million ever could be.